So our talk is titled Building an Intelligent Mental Health App, Integrating Passive Sensing, Prediction, and Conversational AI Interventions. Of us are researchers at Dartmouth in Nick Jacobson's lab in the Center for Technology and Behavioral Health. So in their talks, my co-presenters will describe their work toward more intelligent smartphone apps being. To give some background, to be intelligent, an app we think should understand and be able to adapt to users' goals and lifestyles, primarily through using its smartphone sensors. It also has to be able to provide effective and relevant interventions at the right time and place. So to make well-being apps intelligent, we need to make progress in several different domains. For example, using passive sensing data to infer users' behaviors and patterns, advancing machine learning models to predict clinically relevant mental health states, and building AI agents that integrate this behavioral data and the machine learning models to make intervention decisions. Now I'll intro the presentations that are coming up. So first, Yama will get us started with models can enable more intelligent, just-in-time adaptive interventions. Then Mindy will introduce us to how passive smartphone sensing data can be transformed into informative features that capture user behaviors. Then Hwoyeon will build on Mindy's presentation, sharing his work using network models of raw passive sensing data to predict mental health. And finally, Hee-jong will put the previous talks together to share her progress creating an agent that decides when and how to provide well-being interventions. And with that, I'll pass it over to Yama.
Thanks, Mindy and talk. So I think I'm going to set the stage for the rest of the presenters by sharing a big picture view of where digital mental health is struggling in real-world settings and how combining multimodal sensing with large language model reasoning can help us advance in time intelligence. That last year, over 61 million adults experienced at least one mental health condition. But almost half of them did not receive any treatment. And then barriers like high cost, limited providers, long wait list, and mental health need help. So this is why digital tools matter. They can reach people quickly and at scale. Tools make mental health care accessible doesn't mean that people actually use it. So one of the most important issues in the digital mental health field is the engagement rate in real-world settings. While many clinical trials they show great engagement rates, in the real-world settings, attrition is severe. A lot of people downloaded the mental health app we developed, opened it once, and never come back. Another study also showed that up to 97% of users abandon these apps within 30 days. So even though digital tools increase accessibilities, actual adherence has not improved. And when we look at why people drop out, these are the three big themes. First is the generic content. A lot of apps in the market still offer one-size-fits-all messages that don't speak to someone's culture, value, or personal situation. The users may find it less helpful or useful when it's not personalized. Second, it's about the static scheduling. Many apps still rely on preset schedules, like sending notifications that was like when they're in the meetings or when someone's driving. The system has no awareness of whether the person is actually available in that moment. And third, the receptivity gap. So there is this mismatch between when people actually need help, like when they're experiencing the spike of stress or loneliness, and when they're actually open to receiving support. Most apps miss those windows, and as a result, users choose to drop out. So the problem isn't that people don't want help. is that the way we deliver right now is often irrelevant, not either right timing or disconnected from the real life. So this is why we're studying just-in-time adaptive interventions. Just-in-time adaptive interventions is an intervention about the person's state and context using digital technologies to deliver real-time, personalized support. It offers the scalable mental health support through passive sensing, such as smartphones, wearables, and real-time behavior monitoring to deliver the personalized in-the-moment support. But there are still some current limitations. Most apps using rigid, simple rules like if the step count is less than 1,000, send an activity prompt. But behavior is rarely that simple. A low step count might mean someone is social isolated at home, or it could also mean that they're studying in the library for an all day. Heart rate variability could also reflect stress, or when they're in a workout session. So when the app cannot actually tell the differences or the context, they send irrelevant messages. And once users feel like misunderstood, the trust will drop immediately. So I wanted to give you one example of using rigid predefined rule to prompt intervention. So in this graph, we see that there is a student studying late in the library. A rule-based system may see this person is sedentary and the low step counts and show the low step counts. And then it would trigger like a prompt to encourage them to take a walk. But when a human reading the situation with more context, they'll probably know they're having a final exam tomorrow and know the prompt right now might be annoying and disrupt their studying flow. So this misalignment could lead to intervention fatigue if the notification was sent like frequently. And students may abandon these apps in the scenario because the apps don't really understand their reality. So here's where things get Excel's tool could reason about behavior and say physiological context to make timely intervention decisions like a human clinician. So we now have multimodal sensing that gives us a rich picture of someone's day from different modalities like sleep, stress, movement, social behavior, or even their location. And we have large language models that are surprisingly good at interpreting patterns and making connections across text data. But current large language models were not trained for sensor data, which is a continuous time series data. Large language models read text. They cannot meaningfully make sense of a series of numerical data. And one issue we all are aware is hallucination, which is a big concern when it comes to mental health setting, where clinical safety is highly, highly important. So our team are focused on solving that. How do we safely integrate sensor data and large language model reasoning to build just-in-time adaptive intervention that actually understand the context and can provide intervention at the more precise timing when it's the most needed? Here is the overall pipeline that we're moving toward. So we start with the passive sensing from smartphone, wearables, and system logs to extract behavioral meanings. My colleague, Dr. Mindy will provide a comprehensive review of how we do this. We then analyze patterns in the data like routines, changes, anomalies, and this will feed into an LLM reasoning engine. If it's a good moment, the system can deliver a supportive, personalized, just-in-time adaptive intervention. If not, the system waits. And my colleague, Dr. Hwoyeon, will dive much more into this pipeline and the model architecture in her talk later. And now I'm going to share two examples of how this plays out to give you a sense about how this actually works. So if you remember our earlier example, a student is studying in the library during finals. The system sees that they have elevated stress signals, their location is library, and the exam is tomorrow. In the LLM reasoning process, the LLM can reason based on the context and infer that a walk prompt right now will probably interrupt their flow. So the system decides, let's not intervene yet. And this is exactly the nuance the rule-based system cannot pick up. So let's now look at the second scenario. In the same final week scenario, the system detects using smartphone that the user's location is in dining hall, they're sitting, and the screen has been on for more than 10 minutes. Taking it all together, the LLM infers that the user is eating alone in the dining hall. And then the LLM simulates the potential outcomes and concludes that a gentle prompt such as mindful eating or a small behavior activation nudge could be helpful for them to release some exam stress, or more social interaction could better facilitate their mental well-being during such a stress moment. And the system decides to send an intervention notification in this scenario. So just to wrap up, what we're really talking about today is how these three pieces come together. Passive sensors that can help us understand behavior in real time, and Dr. Mindy will talk more about that soon. Time series modeling and pattern detection that can help us make sense of those signals. Dr. Hwoyeon Seo will walk us through in his study. And large language model that can reason over these patterns to decide the right moment to offer support. Dr. Hee-Jung Han will dive into this as she introduces a Gen AI-based decision-making engine for a mental well-being app that we're developing. So when you put these pieces together, we move from the static generic interventions to context-aware, just-in-time adaptive interventions that could potentially improve engagement and deliver support at a much more precise moment. Thank you, and I'm going to pass on to my brilliant colleagues.
Hello, everyone. Okay. My name is Mindy, and today I'll be discussing how we can transform passive sensing data into personalized mental health metrics. And so the first step to personalizing a mental health app is to incorporate the user's personal behaviors and any mental health symptoms into the app in order to provide tailored content and interventions. And to do this, we need to find a way to passively, objectively, and continuously monitor a person's behaviors, and by proxy, any of their symptoms, into the app over time. And so, as Yama just mentioned, we turned to smartphones and smartwatches to do this. And so for my presentation, I will walk through how we plan to use these devices to understand an individual and provide them with a customized app that is uniquely beneficial to them. Within these devices, we use the myriad of sensors and interactions with the devices in order to extract information about an individual in their everyday environment. With a smartphone, we can use the GPS, call and text logs, accelerometer and gyroscope, ambient light sensor, and phone screen time in order to infer a person's behavior and activity. Furthermore, through a smartwatch, we can examine the heart rate monitor, sleep estimation, and accelerometer and gyroscope to infer even more information surrounding a person in their own environment. Now, diving deeper into each sensor, the GPS provides us with the latitude and longitude of a person's geolocation. And from these recorded coordinates, we can look into a person's movement patterns, such as the distance that they traveled from home, how long they've spent at home, the total distance they've traveled, the number and types of locations that they've visited, and the entropy in their movement. For call and text logs, we can determine the frequency of incoming and outgoing calls and texts, as well as the duration of their calls. And this information can be used to get some idea about how social a person is and how often they're communicating with others. The ambient light sensor on a smartphone can be used to determine the amount of light that a person is exposed to in their environment. For example, we can examine whether they're spending a lot of time in dimly lit places, or do they have frequent exposure to outdoor lighting. For screen time, by examining a log of how often the screen is on and off, we can get an idea about how long a person is interacting with their smartphone, whether it's a reasonable amount of time or contains long continuous stretches of phone use. And we can also determine how frequently they're looking at their phone over a period of time and potentially identify periods where they're constantly checking their phone. The accelerometer and gyroscope are found both in smartphones and smartwatches, and using these, we can estimate a person's physical activity, for example, when they're walking, running, and sitting. We can also determine their step count for a general measure of activity level and calculate the amount of time that they were active and sedentary. The heart rate monitor in smartwatches measures both a person's heart rate, in which we can obtain their resting and active heart rates, as well as heart rate variability, which for some devices is the predominant source that's used to estimate a person's stress level. And lastly, sleep, while technically a combination of sensors in a smartwatch, can be estimated through calculations by the software to extract a person's total sleep time, their sleep quality, such as how often they wake up in the middle of the night, and for some devices, the amount of time spent in each sleep stage. And so while each sensor on its own provides us with ample information that could inform of potential intervention points if the need arises, combinations of these sensors can give us even more information. Take, for example, combining information extracted from where a person spends their time with their call and text logs could give us a more comprehensive picture of a person's amount of social connection, or inversely, their social isolation. Additionally, combining a person's location with their accelerometer and gyroscope measurements and heart rate monitor could provide a better idea about the environment and intensity of a person's physical activity and stress levels. For example, did a person's heart rate spike because they are working out, or did entering their doctor's office result in a physical reaction that could be measured? And lastly, we can add on one more layer of context using these sensors by looking at time. By examining behaviors within a temporal lens, we can further determine if the behaviors, while on their own may be considered normal and even beneficial to one's health, during specific times may be instead considered unusual. For example, while exercising is generally considered healthy, exercising in the middle of the night could instead be unusual behavior. Sleeping, typically also beneficial, might be worrisome if it's happening during the day in addition to at night. And lastly, these devices allow us to monitor these behaviors longitudinally, such that we can establish a person's normal behaviors and then identify fluctuations in these normal patterns that might relate to changes in their mental health and well-being. Now, putting everything together over time, we can get a fairly comprehensive picture of a person's daily life without needing any active input from the person themselves. And using this, we have the opportunity to develop complex rules for when to intervene based only on the individual's own patterns and circumstances. Now, in one last example, let's say that an app detects that a person who through baseline inputs is 20 years old. And it has been detected that they're having lower physical activity than usual, lower screen time than usual, less outgoing calls and texts, less sleep, and a higher than average resting heart rate. And for some, this could indicate a person who's showing reduced activity, increased social isolation, possible disrupted sleep, and increased stress levels, which may be a sign of emerging mental health symptoms. But if the app adds on even more context to the situation, it detects that the person is spending a lot of time at a university library and is detecting these behavioral patterns are happening during the time of year that's right before the holidays, which is generally around exam season for students. And so instead, the app could then take in this additional information and conclude that it's detecting typical patterns of a student studying for final exams. And with this additional context, the app will have a comprehensive understanding of these behavioral patterns specifically for this individual, and then can tailor any actions, such as whether or how to intervene accordingly. And so taking everything together, The sensors and interactions with smartphones and smartwatches have the potential to serve as a passive monitor for a person's mental health, and they enable the possibility of a personalized mental health app. By taking the detected patterns and behaviors over time, the app has the potential to monitor for disruptions in a person's typical rhythm in real time, and through mechanisms that will be described in the following talks, identify when and how to provide tailored interventions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hwoyeon Seo, and today I'm going to talk about our work on why networks matter, investigating suicidal ideation through behavior network dynamics using longitudinal passive sensing data. Once we have the kind of passive sensing features that Dr. Mindy Rose just described, a natural next question is how these signals related to clinically meaningful mental health state. And one thing we've learned from recent work is that different depressed symptoms often show very different behavioral patterns. That brings us to the central question of today's talk. What if suicidal ideation is not simply more severe depression, but instead reflects a breakdown in the behavioral system itself? So first, why is suicidal ideation so hard to predict? One reason is that it fluctuates a lot, sometimes even within the same day. Traditional tools like questionnaire or interviews are important, but they give us only snapshots, not continuous monitoring. Another issue is how we usually analyze passive sensing data. Most studies focus on raw quantities, how many steps someone takes, how long they sleep, how much they use their phone. But here's the problem. Two people can look identical in these raw numbers, while one is approaching a suicidal crisis and the other is completely stable. So, from a system perspective, the risk might not come from how much behavior someone shows, but from how those behaviors interact with each other. This is where the dynamic systems framework comes in. Instead of asking only how intense a symptom is, we ask how are behavior influencing each other over time? Are feedback loops becoming rigid or unstable? Or is the whole system losing flexibility? Network analysis allows us to measure exactly that, how behaviors push and pull on each other across time. So in this study, we used the temporal behavioral networks to see whether these interactions are especially important for suicidal ideation. We had two main goals. First, we wanted to see which PHQ-9 symptoms are better explained by raw behavioral levels versus network dynamics. Second, we specifically tested whether network features improve prediction of suicidal ideation beyond what raw data alone can do. We analyzed data from 115 participants with clinically significant depression from the US. Each person contributed 90 days of data and two continuous data streams, passive sensing and daily EMA. Passive sensing came from smartphones and Garmin wearables. Participants also completed the PHQ-9 through EMA 4 times a day. So we could model each depressive symptom separately, including item 9 for suicidal ideation. Our features covered 4 main domains: activity and mobility, sleep, physiology, social behavior. So each day gives us a very rich, multidimensional picture of daily life. Next, we move from raw features to network dynamics. In each person, we built a temporal networks, showing how behavior at one time predict other behavior on the following day. Our main network metrics was our strength. Our strength simply means how strongly one behavior influences the rest of the system over time. So if a node has high strength, it's actually driving changes in many other behaviors. That makes it a potential intervention target. Here's the overall pipeline in simple terms. We first used the generalized additive model-based time-varying vector autoregressive models to build ideographic network over 90 days for each participant. From those individual networks, we computed the outstrength of each feature for each day. Next, we built mixed effects model for each PHQ-9 symptom using 3 different sets of predictors: raw features only, outstrength only, and a combined model including both. Finally, we compared the model performance using AIC, BIC, and R-squared. And we also evaluated the generalizability using leave one subject out cross-validation. Here are results. This figure shows regression coefficients from the combined model, which includes both raw behavior features and network-based outstrength features across all 9 PHQ-9 symptoms. Red indicates a positive association and blue indicates a negative association, and the stars mark statistically reliable effects. Raw features appears at the top and outstrength features at the bottom. For outstrength specifically, a positive association means that as a symptom becomes more severe, the behavior becomes more central in driving the system. A negative association means the opposite. It becomes less influential. This helps us understand not just which behavior relates to symptoms, but how their influence within the behavioral system changes as symptoms worsen. Across the heat map, many raw behavior and physiological features show broad associations with depressive symptoms. But when we look at suicidal ideation, the pattern shifts. Raw features contribute very little. They are weak and often non-significant. Simply knowing how much someone sleeps, moves, uses their phones does not tell us much about their suicidal thinking. Once we add outstrength, however, the model's ability to account for suicidal ideation increases dramatically. This suggests that suicidal ideation is tied less to absolute behavior levels and more to how strongly behaviors influence one another within the system. There are 2 behavior networks from the same person at 2 time points with very different levels of suicidal ideation. As suicidal ideation increased, different nodes suddenly become dominant. Some connection flips direction. So this isn't just more symptoms, it's a qualitative reorganization of the behavioral system. Here is AIC and BIC. After adding the outstrength features to the model, we observe an interesting pattern. AIC decreased, whereas BIC actually increased. Both AIC and BIC penalize model complexity, but BIC applies a much stronger penalty for adding new parameters. Therefore, the increase in BIC indicates that the model has indeed become more complex, but at the same time, the decrease in AIC suggests that the added outstrength feature meaningfully improved predictive accuracy, even though it is penalized under BIC for the increase in complexity. Because our primary goal here is not strict model parsimony, but rather accurate prediction of a clinically relevant outcome, the reduction in AIC supports the practical value of including outstrength in the model. Here's conditional and marginal R-squared of models. Across all models, we found that majority of explained variance was attributable to random effects, reflecting stable, subject-specific baseline differences in depressive symptoms. In other words, who the person is still accounts for most of the overall risk level. The quick question, however, is not whether individuals differ, but whether network features explain additional meaningful fluctuation within individuals over time. Adding the outstrength variables increased the marginal R-square for suicidal ideation from 0.002 to in the raw model to 0.04 in the combined model, representing nearly a 20-fold increase. This indicates that even after accounting for strong person-specific baselines, network features explain a substantial portion of the remaining variability in socialization. However, unfortunately, when we assess generalizability using Lee 1 subject outcross validation, the out-of-sample marginal R-square drops back to 0.002. This divergence suggests that while network instability powerfully predicts within-person change, it does not generalize well across individuals. In other words, relationship between behavior network instability and societal ideation appears to be highly idiographic, reflecting individual-specific system dynamics rather than universal population-level rules. So here are the main takeaways. Behavior independence as indexed by our strength could capture what raw behavior quantities couldn't show. Specifically, raw behavior features show stronger and more consistent association with depressive symptoms other than societal ideation. And societal ideation is more closely related to changes in how behavior influence one another, rather than to changes in the absolute levels of individual behaviors. Finally, one-size-fits-all population models perform poorly for societal ideation, providing strong support for idiographic personalized modeling approaches. Clinically, this is exciting because our strengths highlights dominant individual drivers that can guide truly personalized interventions. In severe depression, sleep appears to become central, whereas in milder states, activity and outdoor engagement may play a larger role. This naturally connects to the idea of just-in-time adaptive interventions, delivering the right behavior at the right time. And adding our strengths substantially improved model fit, suggesting that graph-based representation may offer a more powerful foundation for future personalized approaches. I'll stop here. I'm very excited that our next speaker will now take us one step closer to how these kinds of personalized data-driven approaches can be translated into real-world interventions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay. So hello everyone, I'm Hee-jung, and now I'm going to talk about towards the LLM-powered decision engines for GTI deliveries. Before start, I want to introduce our Evergreens. Evergreen is an AI-powered wellness platform that provides students with proactive personalized support for their well-being and success. It adapted to each student's needs using context-aware technology, and if students choose behavior sensing data such as sleep patterns, activity levels, and stress indicators. By learning from the routine, academic schedules, and digital habits, Evergreen delivers tailored, evidence-based interventions that help students build resilience and address stress and anxiety before they become larger challenges. To provide personalized interventions, here is a high-level overview of Evergreen's intervention strategy. We start with multimodal sensing. Evergreen collected information from 3 major resources: smartphone sensors, wearables, and Canvas academic data. Together, these streams created a detailed picture of each student's real-time context. The middle section of this flow the part I want to focus on is the decision engines. This includes patterns detection, routine analysis, anomaly identifications, and the reasoning layers powered by large language models. These engines interpret the multimodal data, evaluate whether something meaningful is happening, and determine whether support is needed right now. Finally, the systems move into the context-aware GTI delivery. Once the decision engine identifies dynamic opportunity for interventions, Evergreen tailored the personalized timely responses that will support the student processes when it is most helpful. So as we move forward, I will more focus on specifically on the central decision engines, how it works, why it matters, and how we are advancing it. So now I want to walk you through the overall architecture of our LLM-powered decision engines for GTIs. At the high levels, the system is organized into three key components: the decision orchestrators, the summary agents, and the should-we trigger agents. First, the decision orchestrators is a controller. It runs on a regular schedule every few minutes or can be activated by specific events such as unusual sensor patterns. Its job is to route information through the sub-agents or coordinate the decision-making pipelines. Second, the summary agents act as our deterministic feature builder. It takes multimodal sensors data and transfer them into two forms: a structured set of the engineered features and a native summary that LLM can reason over. The summary agents also maintain a user state store, which track things like the last time an intervention was delivered, how often prompts have been shown, response rate, exposure counts, and recent uptake. It also includes a baseline and anomaly layers to detect deviations from typical behaviors. The third, we have a should-we trigger agents. These agents determine whether we should deliver an intervention right now. This is a hybrid rule-based logic and LLM reasonings. It takes in the summary text and structure features and produce a yes or no decisions along with a confidence score and, when necessary, a request to recheck later. This module also applies clinicals and behavior safeguards, global cooldown rules, power module dose limits, quiet hours, driving and class blocks, and other safety constraints. If the timing is appropriate, it selects which intervention module is most suitable for the user's current states. And finally, if all gates are satisfied, the system delivers the interventions. This slide shows how our summary agents operate within the decision engines. The goal of the summary agents is to take raw multimodal sensor streams from smartphone, smartwatch, and Canvas academic data and transform them into something the reasoning system can actually understand. Each sensor first produces its own structure features. This includes things like movement patterns, location changes, sleep metrics, stress indicators, and academic activities, and more. From there, in our summary agents, we used a two-layer LLM architecture. The first layer consists of one LLM per sensors. A dedicated LLM then interprets those features and produce a concise native summary for that specific data streams. And the second layer is a multimodal LLM that combines all of the individual sensor summaries. This model integrates the native from each sensor, resolve conflict or inconsistencies, and produce a unified full summaries that reflect the student's overall context, behavior, and routines. To build the summary agents, we tried reverse engineering behavior summaries from multimodal data. The idea was straightforward. If we want the decision engines to rely on the LLM generated summaries, we first need to test whether the LLM can accurately reconstruct a student's day based purely on the structured sensor features. Our evaluation pipelines look like this. Start with the optimal full summaries, a high-quality human-written descriptions of a student full day, and created optimal per sensor summaries, split that full summaries into what each summary should have observed on its own. And then we generate the mock data summaries. And then based on the mock data summaries, we generate per sensor summaries based on the mock data using the LLMs. And also we generate a full data summaries combining all the sensors level summaries into the complete native. And then we compare the LLM generated per sensor summaries to the optimal human written one to see how close the model came to the capturing the true behavior patterns. And also we compared the LLM generated full summaries to the optimal human written ones. This reverse engineering approach allowed us to see exactly where the model success and where it struggled. It gives us a systematic way to analyze hallucinations, gap, and inconsistency, and ultimately help us to identify the major limitations. And here's some examples to walk through our steps in details. The first one is the full optimal summary. This is a human written narrative that pulls together all the sensor data we collect from phone, watch, and canvas into a single coherent description of one entire day of a student's. In this particular examples, there are two important trigger events embedded in a day. And then we break the full summary down into each individual sensor summaries. Here's the GPS examples. So these are also human written narratives, but each of one focused on just a single sensors. After that, we generated mock sensor data based on the human written per sensor summary. The data is sampled at 15 minutes intervals and included multiple features from each sensors, giving us a structured version of the day that we can fit into the models. Now, we used LLM to generate per sensor summary based on the mock data. This is the prompt that I used. And we tried 3 different LLM models. First, Llama 327B and Llama 3.211B. But the first 2 models lack efficient sensor data and constrain significant missing information, making them unusable for our needs. And the last model is a GPT-OSS 120B, and this model shows better performance than Gemma and Llama. So we stick into this model to generate the complete summaries by integrating the individual summaries from each sensors. This is the prompt that I used. And then we generate full summaries like the one shown here. What's so encouraging is that the model actually captures many of the same behavior patterns we see in the optimal human written summary. So at a high level, the native structures and the day's main events are close to the optimal versions, but there are still important limitations. First, hallucinations. The system often fills in the gap with incorrect or assumed information, which made the summaries unreliable for any well-being recommendations. The second, day-level summaries were simply too coarse. Our system produced 1 summary per day, but meaningful support for students require much more immediate context-aware insights. We realized we need closer to real-time understanding rather than retrospective summaries. Third, latency and computational cost. When we explore moving from daily summaries to hourly summary, compute requirements grew exponentially. The latency made the system too slow or too expensive to deploy at scale. Finally, we identify a need of data compressions to support to support higher frequency updates, especially within the multimodal sensor data. We need a special way to compress continuous data stream without losing semantic meanings. This limitation ultimately guide us toward a more adaptive real-time architecture. Looking ahead, here's the key steps in advancing evergreen summary agents capabilities. First, semantic tokenizations. We are developing a method to convert continuous sensor streams into discrete semantic tokens, compact, meaningful representations of behaviors and context. This will allow the system to process high-frequency data far more efficiently. Second, we are building a more sophisticated reasoning engine using chain-of-thoughts prompting. This includes 2 core reasoning modes. Abductive reasoning which helps evergreen infer the most likely cause behind a patterns or signals, and counterfactual reasoning, which allows the system to simulate possible outcomes and provide students with more actionable guidance. More broader, we move into the implementation of the should we trigger agents. We use a hybrid decision system with trigger events, trigger intervention tables that define clear rules and LLM reasoning layers that helps to determine whether the GTI should be delivered. And finally, we are preparing a large-scale evaluations. We have two randomized control trial planned with sample size of 200 and 600 participants. These RCTs will help us visually to measure Evergreen's impacts on students' well-being and validate the efficiency of our approach. Together, these next steps move us toward a more intelligent, responsive, and evidence-driven support systems for students.
Thanks, Hee-jung. I'm jumping in now just for some final thoughts, but while I'm giving my silly final thoughts, please add some questions in the Q&A section. We've already gotten a couple. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm looking forward to seeing what people want to share. So, okay, just like some wrap-up notes about the future directions for creating intelligent mental health apps as we see them. So we've talked a lot here today about generally moving well-being apps toward proactive support rather than static content. So to be proactive, apps need to account for both a user's long-term goals as well as their current state in terms of motivation and like where they're physically at. That'll help it to be more embedded in their life. Another point is increasing an app's intelligence requires advancements in multiple overlapping domains. As someone who has like been in this field of digital mental health for a little bit, it's starting to feel different, just like how much technical advancement we need in so many different areas and how much collaboration we need. So technical and design teams need to be working closely at this stage as we're advancing with the advent of LLMs and things like that. And my last note is that this to work and for these like for an intelligence mental health app to be useful, we need user-centered design. So Yama brought up during her talk this mental health app engagement cliff where users stop using it and lose interest quickly. So more intelligence in an app won't solve this alone. We need users' input to integrate these technical advancements in ways they find acceptable. Okay, and so thanks everyone for your attention and thanks to all my co-presenters. It was so nice to watch your talks. It's like hard to get feedback because we're in a webinar, but I'm like assuming standing ovation, confetti kind of stuff. Anyways, so let's get into the questions. We have one from Devin Watts. This is for Mindy. How are sleep stages differentiated from each other using this measure? I.e. REM sleep from light sleep. If I click answer live or whatever. Are they originally benchmarked against measures like polysomnography? Mindy?
Sure. So I'm not super familiar with how these devices measure sleep stage, but I do know that whenever a person is asleep, depending on the stage they're in, their body has different physiological reactions to it. Like in light sleep, I don't know, maybe a person might be moving a little more and like their heart rate changes based on the different sleep stage that they're in. And so by looking at a combination of the accelerometer, which can get pretty fine measure of how much a person is moving, along with a person's heart rate and their heart rate variability, they can combine the two in order to look at the different combinations and guess what sleep stage they might be in. And I'm sure that these measures have been compared against like polysomnography to see how close they can estimate the different sleep stages, but I'm not completely sure as to how accurate they are and everything.
Thanks, Mindy. And now we have a question from Harry Reed. So Harry said, you're interested in tracking social contacts. If we think of in-person social contact as the highest value type of social contact, how do these models track this? Maybe this is a question for Yama.
Yeah, sure. I can jump into this one. So using Evergreen as the example, that's a study that that's an app that we're designing for Dartmouth undergrads. So one thing that we can use to track social context or social interaction is that we are working on the access to the Wi-Fi signals across like Dartmouth and also the Bluetooth signals. So you can imagine like if we're still working with like Dartmouth to get access, and then so we can potentially know like kind of like a hotspot like blueprint, like where people are getting together and this person is surrounded by like more like hotspot like with their like Bluetooth or like with their Wi-Fi signals, because like students in this evergreen context like tend to connect to the school like the campus Wi-Fi. So I think that's one potential way that we could do this.
Thanks, Yama. Question from Purvish. How were the LLMs customized to understand or summarize sensor data? How many LLMs in the system architecture, and how were they selected?
So, wow, I can answer that questions. So, we are not using the raw signal data to training the LLMs. We are data feature engineering to understand to make the LLM understand. So, and then we have a structured features where then fit into LLM using the constant formats such as JSON. And in some case, LLM was needs fine tuning or instructor tune to understand the sensor summaries. And for how many LLMs in the system architectures? So right now in the Evergreen project, we have 9, 10. So we have 10 sensors. We implemented 10 LLM because we want one LLM per one sensor. So we have like 10 different LLMs. And also we have a multimodal LLM. We need to add multimodal LLMs for second layers. We have like in total 11s right now.
Great. Thanks, Hejong. We have a question from Nicholas. How can you check whether the LLM decides to intervene at the right time? Like whether there's a need and a receptivity?
I can briefly answer this one. So I think one thing we can do is to check the response latency. If the user open the prompt notification with like certain minutes, they're likely receptive. But if it's open like across a longer time, it doesn't mean that they're receptive. But that also depends on the person's like state. So but I think that's one example. And also another one is that we will have these buttons still in the evergreen context for Dartmouth undergrads that when we prompt a notification, they can choose yes or not now. So if they choose like, yes, I want to do the intervention, they can interact with the chatbot to receive the intervention. And they could also click like not now, and then the chatbot could potentially like reach out to them like at the later timing. So I think those are like some way that we're going to check the receptivities. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Yama. There's a question here, I think, for Hwoyeon, from Rosalind Picard. She says, great to see the ideographic dynamics model by Hwoyeon Seo and team. On the heat map, the stars are 95% confidence intervals that don't include 0, but this doesn't mean those are significant statistically. Which of these findings were corrected for multiple comparisons? The plot shows 306 comparisons, and I'm guessing there were more than those shown. Hwoyeon?
Oh yeah, that's a very valid concern. Yeah, and I should have been more cautious mentioning that we didn't correct for multiple comparison because the study wasn't designed to make inferential claims about individual predictors. So yeah, our conclusions are based on model level performance rather than coefficient significance. But yeah, your point is really valid.
Okay, I think that's all of our time. Thank you everyone again for all your great questions and for listening, and thanks to my co-presenters again. See you, man.
Right.